So to introduce our next speaker, her name, Gail Evans. Gail is the best-selling author of Play Like a Man, Win Like a Woman, a New York Times bestseller and regarded as one of the most influential books about women in business. Gail's career started in government in the 1960s at the White House, where she served in the office of Special Counsel to the President. She was instrumental to the creation of the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity and the 1966 Civil Rights Act. She began working at CNN at its inception in 1980 and was eventually promoted to executive vice president, creating some of CNN's most popular programs. Gail is currently an adjunct professor at Georgia Tech, go Jackets, teaching gender, race, and ethnicity and organizational behavior. So I'm gonna read a little bit of her book, just a line here, to show you guys how great this book is, and they are outside if you're interested. But a line in here: the word sorry is a female addiction. We use it so often to express so much, and in so many contexts, it has virtually no meaning. It's just something we say, the iceberg lettuce of conversation, a kind of verbal filler. So I'm gonna leave it at that, and I'm gonna bring her to the stage so she can tell us a little bit more about language and women thriving. Please welcome to the stage, Gail Evans.
You know, I have to tell you the funniest thing when you write a book. I have no idea that I wrote that. It was so many years ago. It's always interesting to hear when somebody quotes you and you go, did I really say that? So we don't have a lot of time because I know everybody's hungry, but I want to share with you a few thoughts about things I don't think we discussed in much detail this morning. And that's about language and about the power of language and the difference in how language looks when it's talked about a man and a woman. So when Hillary Clinton was first beginning her run for the presidency, she was giving a speech in upstate New York, and she had the flu. She had a really bad case of the flu. And as the speech was ending, she was sort of wobbling a little, and one of her staffers pushed a chair up behind her, and she pretty much flopped in the chair. And the next morning, the big headlines in the New York Times: Mrs. Clinton faints. And I thought, isn't that interesting? She lost all of her titles, she became Mrs. Clinton, and faints. Not a very powerful word. Somehow or other, faints makes me think of vapors and Gone with the Wind, you know. And I thought, this woman's running for the presidency. If this had been a man, would they have said faints? I mean, does power faint? I doubt it. So I sort of thought about it and let it go for a while. And about 6 weeks later, Mike Krzyzewski, we've been talking about sports this morning. How many people know who Mike Krzyzewski is? A little. So one of the things I would tell all of you, it's not a bad idea to know a little bit about sports. You don't have to know a lot. Mike Krzyzewski is the coach of the Duke University men's basketball game, one of the winningest coaches in U.S. basketball history. Who was the winningest? We just had a discussion? Okay, ladies, come on, let's be proud of it. All right, Pat Summitt. So Krzyzewski was coaching at Cameron Stadium at Duke. This is about 6 or 8 weeks after Mrs. Clinton. He had the same flu, and he got very wobbly. Somebody sort of pushed the chair up behind him, the bench, and he pretty much flopped down. Next day, all the sports pages around the country, big banner headlines: Coach K collapses. I thought, isn't that interesting? But when you think about it, power collapses, presidents collapse, they don't faint. Very interesting when you look at the words. In our language, and in most languages, the words around power and accomplishment tend to be associated with males, and the words around being subordinate or being acted upon tend to be connected to females. Okay, so faints means something happened to you. All right, collapsing is an active way of being. I mean, it's sort of interesting, but they're very different kind of words in terms of their actions. And so I began looking and seeing, well, wow, are there other places? Are there real differences if the same exact thing happens? Is there a real difference and whether it happens to a man or it happens to a woman and how we talk about it? So I began looking at a lot of different places, and what I discovered was the power words always seem to be attached to males, and the subordinate words tend to be attached to females. So our assumption is that he has the power, and we look at the words alone like power. If I ask a group of men if they like power, everybody in the room raises their hand because they're very happy with power. If I ask a group of women, it's very interesting. People sort of go halfway. Few people go like this, few people say nothing. And then somebody says, well, I like influence. And I know, ladies, the word's power. The word's not influence. So what's the difference? Well, it's very, very interesting when you start to think about it. Is there a male and female definition that's different in these kind of words? So when you ask men, and all of this has been studied and restudied now, when you ask men and boys, they're clear. Power is about being able to get something done. Power is about having the ability to win. When you talk to women, what you hear is power is much more about subjugation. Power means one person is up and another person's down. So with a lot of these words, we even have a different definition in our mind, even from what the dictionary says. So I started an experiment. I'm going to make all of you work this morning, okay? I have a young man and a young woman. They both work for me, let's say, about 12 years. They're in their late 30s, maybe early 40s. And I have a fairly flat organization, and there's really not a place for them to grow to the next place. And I know, one of the tips for all of you is that if you're a really good leader, part of your job is to grow good people and then move them on so that they can keep growing, not to hide them and keep them at some place because they're so good at it. So they both have come to me and said they're looking for new jobs. And would I be a reference for them? And of course, I say yes. So they're both excellent employees, very similar and all the rest. Let's take the young lady first. What are the first 3 words I say about her when I write a reference? Anybody got an idea? What's the first word? She is hardworking. Thank you very much. So this has been studied, restudied, and studied again. And number 1 on the female list is hardworking. What's number 2? Dependable, okay, dependable, loyal, okay? That's number 3 on the list, okay? What do you think is next? Bud? Okay. Smart, so very interesting. Somebody said smart. People always say smart or intelligent on the female list. Interestingly enough, that's number 4 on the female list. Now, we think that's nice. Guess where it is on the male list? Right, like 97. Don't laugh, it's really not good news. The reason it's so far down on the male list is the gender schema assumption in our society is that a male is competent at the office or in business until he proves his incompetence. The female is incompetent till she proves her competence. So you need to establish that she is smart or intelligent. With him, it's an assumption. Now, the truth is that's about what part of the society we dominate, because if you look at our personal lives, if you see a man and a baby in a diaper, the gender assumption is incompetence till he proves his competence. And if you see a young woman in the same situation, the assumption is competence. So this is about the part of the world we dominate. Okay, so she's hardworking, dedicated, and loyal. Anybody got another guess? Okay, so somebody said nice. Okay, so literally on the female list, nice is number 5. Okay, I actually want to be nice. I am nice, but it's not really the business words you want in your reference. Okay, so then the other one I heard somebody over there say is collaborative. Team player, collaborative. Okay, so she is hardworking, loyal, dedicated, devoted, collaborative, team player, nice and smart. Sounds just like my golden retriever. Right? Great description, all right? Now let's take the male list, okay? What's the first thing we say? He's got what? All right, drive, ambition, go-getter, that's number 3. What's number 1? A leader, thank you. Somebody over here, I can't see with all the lights. Right, he has leadership potential. Anybody got a guess at what the other one is? Number 2 is strategic. Okay, so he has leadership potential, he's strategic, and he's a go-getter. Who got the job? Okay, so isn't that interesting? Now, I said that both of these people I liked equally, they were equally competent, they did an equally good job for me. Why didn't we use the same words? Really important thing for us all to think about. So we don't have a lot of time this morning, but one of the things I want to suggest to all of you is that the brand you have are the 3 words people say about you when you're not in the room. And you need to make sure that those 3 words match where you want to go and how you want to present yourself. And you can determine what those 3 words are by the way you talk about yourself, by the way you get other people to talk about you. So one of the things that's happened with women in our society is they've fallen in love with being hardworking. That seems to be the wonderful word. What does hard work get you? So ladies, if everybody, I have never stood in front of an audience in my life where every woman in the audience didn't understand that what hard work gets you is more work. So why, when we talk about how complex our lives are, when we talk about all of the different multitasking things women need to do in their lives, why would you set yourself up as hardworking? When it's 5:30 and somebody needs to rerun the budget numbers, do they ask the hard worker or the go-getter? Okay? So you don't get to complain about how hard you have to work if that's the way you set yourself up. So think to yourself. I always kiddingly say to people that I meet women all the time who believe that, they always say to me, I get in an hour earlier than everybody else, and I stay at least a half an hour or an hour later because it's like I am clear how important hard work is and how it shows what a dedicated employee I am. I always say to them, I think most of the people wonder why it takes you 2 hours longer to get your work done. You know, working smart, working, you know, thoughtfully, working strategically are the answers to our success. It's not about hard work and drudgery. It's about getting through it in the smartest kind of ways. So one of the things I want you all to think about doing is not just doing it for yourself, not just choosing the better words. And the truth is, what you say about yourself is what people believe. So when you say to people, you know, tell people how hard you work, that's the label you get in your brand. You can talk about yourself in very, very different kind of ways. You can talk about the strategy you use to get there, and people begin thinking about you as strategic. And you can take words you don't even like and turn them around. You can take words like ambitious that you're nervous about, might make you look, you know, like you're too pushy or aggressive or tough, and the way in which you use them in a sentence can allow you to have them be positive, not negative. But one of the other things we want to think about this is not just for ourselves. Most of you are here with somebody else that you know, somebody that you work with. As you begin to think about what are the 3 words you want people to say about you when you're not in the room, you need to share them with your friends, with the people you trust that you work with, so they begin using those words about you too. This is one of the things I think that's probably my most important message for women, is that we have sort of played what I call a solo game. most women have believed that this is about, I can do it. If I give more, if I work harder, if I get smarter, if I take another course and whatever else, I can do it. What I believe is that I can do it has in essence gotten us a bunch of one-offs. I mean, the fact that we're still celebrating first women, a lot of times I get introduced the first woman executive vice president at CNN. I think I should be dead. The whole idea that in 2017 we're celebrating first women, first minorities, and the rest, I think is frightening rather than exciting. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that we play this solo game, that it's about, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. We need to switch from I can do it to we can do it. This is about playing like a team. This is about all of us supporting each other. This is not about just I, because I really just get you only so far. When you look at the numbers, and sadly the numbers are not very good in terms of women in leadership in this country, that what we see is that when you have one woman in the room, it's a token. I kiddingly tell people that my life was always 14 men and me. And it's like, one woman in the room, you can do as much as you can do, but once you're out of the room, you have to start all over again. Two women in the room, I kiddingly call cahoots, okay? Doesn't really matter. Three women in the room, three minorities in the room, means you've achieved critical mass. It's no longer about your gender, race, or ethnicity. It's about your competency. But that doesn't happen till there are three of us in the room. And those kind of things are not going to occur in the business corporate world. And it does not matter whether we're talking about the law or medicine or corporate America, or we're all in love with the fact that the entrepreneurial world has so many women in it. What's the problem with that? That is that once the company becomes really successful, some big corporation buys it. And then you're part of the same old system. We need to make the breakthroughs in the big kind of ways, and we can't do that one at a time. We have to do it together. So with something as simple as language, we need to start talking about each other as though we're players, not talking about each other as though we're subordinates. It's fascinating when you look at some of the more things about language. There's a big article in the Harvard Business Review a couple years ago that talked about how women have the same leadership competencies as men. And women actually excel men in the 5 basic competencies, in 2 of them. There's only one area where women fall behind men, and that's in terms of vision. And when I read it, I thought to myself, well, that doesn't make sense to me. Women have vision, women have big thoughts, women think about the future all of the time. But then I thought, vision, it's not a very female kind of word. How many times do women walk around talking about my vision? But then I thought, wow, you know, like every man I ever worked for has been on the cover of Time magazine or someplace called a visionary. Who are the women visionaries that I know? Who are the women visionaries I've thought of through history? And actually, when I first started doing it, the only one I could come up with was Joan of Arc. But very interesting. Somebody said Oprah, and I think that's okay, a possibility. Somebody else once said to me, Mother Teresa. But when you think of vision and women, there are not a lot of women throughout history who are labeled as visionaries. But every single man who ever invented anything or ran a huge corporation is at some point referred to as visionary. So I began looking at the word and I said, okay, here's another example of the language stuff. And at just about that time, a friend of mine called me, and she was in the running, one of the finalists, to be the president of a major university, the first woman who would hold that position at that university. And she sent me the 10 or 15 pages in academia that you have to write when you're going through one of those kind of searches. And I read it all, and I called her back. I said, this is great, but I just read this article about how women miss out on the leadership world in vision. I said, I want you to go back, and I want you to find 3 or 4 times in your essay where you say, my vision for this institution is, or in some way use the word vision. So she said, okay, it sounds like a good idea, I'll do it. Well, turns out she makes it to the finals, and she flies in and gets taken to the university to meet with the board. And as she sits down at the table, a very august gentleman at the end of the table, who turned out to have been the chairman emeritus of the board, looks at her and says, Doctor, I want to tell you that your vision for this university is almost exactly aligned with that of the board. She said at that moment, she, number one, wanted to crack up laughing. And number two, was clear she had the job. Now, we've laughed about it since she did get the job. But it's very simplistic. I don't believe, she probably would have gotten the job anyway. We don't know that. But the fact that she didn't label it as her vision in the first place might have made a difference. Because vision is a word that talks about power and leadership. So we sort of throw away our words. I'm very struck that when I get introduced for speeches, when women introduce me 3/4 of the time, I get this really nice introduction. I met the person beforehand, and we've been, in the green room or whatever, and we talked for 4 or 5 minutes, and she comes out and she does a nice introduction. And I say nice because it's warm and it's friendly. I would say at least 75% of the time, my title is wrong. I get to be a vice president or a senior vice president. For those of you in corporate America, you know there's a big difference between vice president, senior vice president, and executive vice president, okay? Now, I don't care. It's all been fine with me, and it's wonderful. But it's very interesting that somehow or other, vice president sounds good to everybody. So that's nice. I watched this, and this used to happen with me as a joke, that when you have a man and a woman introduces him, she bumps him up one. Okay, so kiddingly, there was a guy who I frequently we would be out speaking at the time, who was a senior vice president, and I was the executive. And they would reverse our titles if a woman was speaking, was doing the introduction. If a man was doing it, they always got him right. But if a woman was doing it, there was a totally different flair. Now, it's wonderful that we feel good about each other, but one of the things that becomes important is we want to inspire the next generation. So we want to make sure that what we say about each other is the most powerful, not the least powerful, because we want the younger women to understand there are women who are going to make it, and they can be one of them. But it's fascinating. If I went through this room, if I started out with the first woman in this corner and asked everybody to introduce themselves, the first woman would set the tone for the entire room. And whatever she said would be the rule of how you're supposed to say it. So if she introduced herself and talked about, this is my job and what I do, but I have 3 children who are the love of my life, everybody else in the room would have to find something personal either to say about their family, and if they didn't have children, they'd talk about their dog. But the other thing they would do is make sure they didn't step on the person in front of them, so that each woman would have to look a tiny bit less powerful than the woman in front of her, so she didn't look like she was boasting and bragging. So by the time we got to the end of the room, most of our studies show us that between 10 and 15, the woman would be 10 or 15% less powerful as she introduced herself than she was in reality. Because she wasn't talking about herself, she was talking about all of those women in front of her and making sure that she didn't step on anybody. Very interesting when you're just telling the truth. If I had a group of men, what do you think would happen? Yeah. Just fascinating. Exactly the same thing would happen in reverse. So that each guy would have to be a tiny bit more powerful than the guy in front of him. So when we're just telling the truth, okay? In those moments, we've asked everybody to just introduce themselves. That the psychology of our human beings is that by the time we got to the end of the room, all the men would be about 20% more powerful than all the women. Yes?
Does that dynamic change if it is a mixed room?
Yes. The dynamic, yeah. Somebody asked if the dynamic changed if it's a mixed room. Yes. Once a very mixed room, then what happens is there are some women and some men who go rogue. Not everybody. That then becomes a matter of how confident you are personally. So that there are a lot of women and a lot of men who follow the rule when it's a mixed room. But a lot of the men and women still stick in their own script, and the women listen to what the other women say, and the men listen to what the other men say. So it's interesting. So all these dynamics exist across our society, and I can tell you story after story where the same kind of dynamics that hold women back in the workplace hold men back in our personal lives. I mean, it's a matter of what sphere you dominate. So one of the things we have to do, I really believe, and I only have a second left, is we need to be out there supporting each other, taking care of each other, pushing each other along. You know, one of the things that happens is women are afraid to give anybody straight feedback. I hear from men all the time that, you know, we went into a meeting and one of the guys screwed up and we walked out and we all strategized about how to overcome what he screwed up about and how to get back in front of the client again or something. But they always tell me, I could never say that to a woman because I might hurt her feelings. We have to be each other's coaches. We have to be each other's mentors. And we have to be each other's sponsors. If we aren't there supporting each other, and if we stay there playing our single game, we're going to stay stuck where we have been for decades. Because progress for women in the terms of leadership in this country and in the world is at best creeping incrementalism. It's little tiny stuff, and then we are in a backward trend right now. We're going to have to come back again and work even harder. So I'd leave all of you with the thought that this is a game we need to play together. I love the guys. I've spent my entire life playing with them. But women need to be there to support other women, or we're not going to move any farther than where we are. Thank you all very much.